dropped out of high school in a single-parent family. I'm not giving my daughter to you. Get out of here.
My son, Michael, proposed to his girlfriend, Emily Parker. I went with him to meet her parents, but we found out her father was Charles Parker, who runs a famous brand store. Knowing his bride-to-be came from a prestigious family, Michael nervously answered all of Charles's questions confidently. However, the moment Charles learned I had only a high school diploma, he punched Michael. I couldn't contain my anger towards a man who looked down on others because of their background. We'll see you again. Leaving those words behind, Michael, Emily, and I headed to the hospital. On the way, I told her I might have to fight Charles. After hearing her response, I made up my mind. The next day, Charles was shocked when he learned who I really was. I am George Anderson, 69 years old. Since my wife passed away, I've lived alone with my son, Michael. After retiring, my legs and back weakened rapidly, making it impossible for me to walk for long periods, so now I rely on a wheelchair. Even inside the house, it's hard for me to walk without Michael's support. He's 28 years old now, in his prime working years. Not wanting to be a burden on his job, I hired a housekeeping service. Still, Michael worries about me and tries to take me out in a wheelchair even on his days off. I always silently thank him in my heart for his kindness. Michael also had a turning point in his life. He proposed to his girlfriend, Emily Parker. One night, he came home from work and told me about it, almost making me drop the tea I was holding.
Dad, I proposed to Emily.
Really? And what did she say? I anxiously waited for his response. Michael slowly made a thumbs up with his hand.
She said yes, she'll marry me.
I'll never forget the happiness on his face at that moment. Holding back my tears of joy, I congratulated him. Congratulations, you've really grown into a fine man.
Thanks.
But his excitement was short-lived, as Michael suddenly became downcast. What's wrong? You just successfully proposed, and now you look all gloomy.
Well, the proposal was a success, but now I have to get her parents' permission to marry her. I'm really nervous about it.
I remembered how nervous I was when I went to meet my late wife's parents. Her father was a very stubborn man, and I pleaded many times before he finally approved our marriage. Now, Michael was about to go through the same rite of passage. I patted him on the shoulder to encourage him. I was really nervous too when I went to make my marriage proposal, but if you convey your feelings sincerely, they'll definitely see your honesty. Not to boast, but Michael is a really great guy. He's serious about his job and helps with the housework. He's also well liked by the neighborhood ladies for his friendly demeanor.
Got it. I'm a bit scared, but I'll give it my best shot.
That's the spirit. Let's celebrate your successful proposal with a drink. That night, the two of us toasted with a special bottle of wine. The meeting with her parents was arranged at an upscale restaurant. Emily went out of her way to choose a restaurant that could accommodate my wheelchair. It's no wonder Michael fell for her. She's a truly considerate woman. I'm sure these two will be happy together. Suddenly, I felt like giving Michael a gift as he prepared for the marriage meeting. To encourage him and to buy something suitable for him as a man, I decided to get him a present. While he was at work, I went to the main upscale department store with the assistant I hired. As I looked through various items, I spotted a pair of glasses, but since he hadn't yet gotten approval from her parents, it seemed a bit premature. Instead, I headed to the men's accessory section. Which one would be good? I muttered as I examined the items. Since I was in a wheelchair and couldn't reach the shelves, I called a store clerk. "Excuse me, I'd like to see the items on the top shelf." However, the clerk saw my wheelchair and ignored me. Thinking the clerk might not have heard me, I called out again. The clerk snickered and said, "Our store doesn't carry items suitable for someone like you." I was infuriated by the clerk's attitude. Just as I was about to complain, a man in an expensive suit emerged from the back. The other clerks acted very deferentially towards him. It seemed he was the top person in this store. He appeared to be in his late 50s, with a stout build. I complained to him about the clerk's behavior. "Excuse me, I was treated very rudely by one of your staff." As I voiced my complaint, the clerk called out, "Mr. Parker," and quickly ran over. This man in the suit isn't just a store manager. He's the owner of the store. Upon hearing his name and looking closely, I recognized his face. He is Charles Parker, the head of a major apparel company known for its men's brand. His brand is famous nationwide and well known even in Europe.
Sir, is there a problem with the clerk?
Charles looked down at me and asked again. When I asked the clerk over there for help, he responded by mocking me. I expected Charles to apologize immediately and correct the situation. However, just as I felt relieved, Charles snorted and laughed.
Sir, this store only carries high-end men's items. If you're dissatisfied, you might want to look elsewhere.
What? What did you say? I was shocked and furious at his response.
Can't you see? Our customers are all wealthy. We don't have anything suitable for someone as shabby as you.
Charles smeared down at me, laughing along with the clerks. Outraged by the treatment I received, I stormed out of the store. Fine, I wouldn't want anything from this place anyway. I knew it was a popular brand among celebrities and notable people, but this was unbelievable. I managed to buy a different gift elsewhere, but the shock of being thrown out of the store lingered. I plan to give Michael his present after the marriage meeting goes smoothly. And today, we are heading to the upscale restaurant where her parents are waiting.
I'm getting nervous.
Pushing my wheelchair, he sighs. It'll be fine. Emily's parents are surely good people. Encouraging Michael repeatedly, we finally arrived at our destination. Waiting there were Emily and her parents. But the moment I saw her father's face, I couldn't help but exclaim, "Aw."
What's wrong, Dad?
"Oh, nothing." Her father was none other than Mr. Parker. Although Emily's last name was the same, it wasn't uncommon, so I hadn't given it much thought. When I looked at Charles, he smiled and nodded at me. His demeanor was entirely different from our previous encounter at the store, and I couldn't hide my surprise.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having us today.
He greeted us and motioned for us to take our seats. That's when I realized he didn't remember meeting me. To him, I was just an unsuitable customer whose face he hadn't bothered to notice. Even though I knew he had forgotten me, I reminded myself we were here for the marriage meeting. I calmed myself, trying not to get emotional. Still, The thought of Charles becoming Michael's fill didn't sit well with me. Then the French dishes were served, and the meal began. As I felt awkward by myself, Charles started talking.
So, where did you meet my daughter Emily?
Well, I met Emily through a mutual acquaintance.
Michael and she met through a coworker and fell in love at first sight. They went on several dates after work and deepened their feelings for each other.
Well, it seems you have quite an eye to be interested in my daughter.
She told me about her family after we had been dating for a while. I was really surprised to learn that her father is the president of a famous apparel company.
I bet you were.
Michael seemed to be getting along well with Charles. I felt relieved as the atmosphere became more relaxed with her parents. Emily, who had been nervous at first, also began to relax seeing them get along. Then Charles brought up a new topic.
Our family has a long, distinguished history. My father often told me it was my duty to continue the family line. That's the role of the head of the Parker family.
I see.
The atmosphere grew tense. Swallowing hard, Michael watched as Charles's demeanor changed.
That's why I need to determine if you are truly worthy to be my daughter's husband. Let's see if you have what it takes, Michael.
Charles grinned at Michael. Despite the smile, his words made it clear he thought we were inferior. As I noticed in the store, Charles was an incredibly arrogant man. Even though he managed a high-end brand store, he seemed to believe that all the glory built up over generations was his own achievement. Emily quietly scolded him.
Dad, please choose your words more carefully.
In an instant, Charles slapped her across the face. It was so sudden that Michael and I were frozen.
How dare you speak to your father like that? I decide who you marry. Keep quiet.
Emily, her cheek red from the slap, looked downcast. Though stunned, I knew this had gone too far.
Mr. Parker, that was a bit much.
Michael seemed to think the same and immediately reprimanded him. But this only made Charles glare at him.
Oh, a young upstart like you dares to talk back to me.
I came here today to get your approval to marry Emily.
Despite facing a formidable opponent, Michael didn't flinch and looked him straight in the eye. He wasn't giving up on marrying Emily, no matter what. Inspired by his courage, I also addressed Charles. My son is hardworking and highly regarded by his superiors. He's still in his 20s, but he has a promising future.
Huff, are you desperately trying to sell him to join our family?
I remained calm, refusing to be provoked by Charles's snide remarks. I wish for my son and Emily to be happy. Please give your blessing to their marriage. I strongly pleaded.
Please, allow me to marry your daughter.
Michael also pleaded. But Charles clicked his tongue loudly.
Didn't you hear me? I'll decide if you're worthy to be my son-in-law.
Dad, please don't raise your voice. You'll disturb the other patrons.
Be quiet. I will decide everything about your marriage.
Ignoring Emily's plea, Charles glared at us and said,
Why are only the two of you here for a marriage meeting? It's customary for both parents to be present.
You know, Michael's mother.
Michael had already explained our family situation to her, but Charles seemed to have forgotten. My wife passed away when Michael was in high school. We've been living together ever since. We overcame the grief of losing our family and are here now. My role, since losing my wife, is to see Michael's happiness.
So, It's a single-parent family. People like you should know your place and not try to join our family.
Michael and I were shocked by the insult to our family. Both Emily and her mother looked at Charles in disbelief.
Please, take back what you just said. I can tolerate insults to me, but I won't stand for disrespect towards my parents.
Michael, sitting next to me, was red-faced with anger.
Insult? I merely stated a fact.
Charles sneered, clearly trying to provoke him. He then ignored our opinions and bombarded Michael with questions.
Do you have any promotion prospects?
If the current project goes well, then's a chance I'll be promoted to manager.
Trying to get married with just a manager position? How ridiculous.
Every time Michael answered, Charles laughed mockingly. The atmosphere in the room felt like a high-pressure interview, heavy with tension. Both Emily and her mother were silent, their heads bowed, seemingly intimidated by Charles.
I only like highly educated elites. Of course, Michael, you graduated from a decent university, right?
I was getting angry at the way he scrutinized Michael. I wanted to put Charles in his place for looking down on us and making snide remarks. However, if I said something unnecessary, it might jeopardize Michael and Emily's marriage.
I attended a national university to study economics and also have experience studying abroad.
Despite Charles's pressure, Michael answered confidently. Emily seemed reassured by his demeanor, and I felt proud of my son. But Charles, apparently displeased with Michael's attitude, frowned and directed a question at me.
And which university did you attend?
I felt uneasy but knew I couldn't lie. I answered honestly. I graduated high school due to financial reasons and couldn't attend university. Charles raised an eyebrow and fell silent. In the heavy silence, Michael spoke up.
Emily and I don't care about each other's educational backgrounds. We are serious about getting married, so.
Just as Michael was about to continue speaking, Charles's heavy fist struck him in the face. Michael. The force of the punch sent him crashing through the door into the hallway. A passing waitress screamed in shock. I maneuvered my wheelchair to Michael and saw his nose was red and swollen. Emily rushed over and pressed a handkerchief to his nose. I had reached my limit with Charles. What do you think you're doing to my son? I shouted at him, but Charles looked down at us with a cold disdain.
A single-parent family and a high school dropout? No way I'm giving my daughter to you. Get out of here.
Apparently, he was unhappy with our family situation and Michael's education and had struck him because of it. We'll see you again. Although I was filled with the urge to fight back, Michael's care was my priority now. Suspecting a fracture, we needed to get to the hospital immediately. I glared at Charles before asking the waitress to call a taxi. While we waited, I turned to Charles. Mr. Parker, don't you recognize me?
Huh? I don't know any shabby guy like you.
Charles glanced at me and laughed dismissively. I see. That's unfortunate.
What? Are you trying to say you're not at the bottom?
Ignoring his sneer, I didn't respond. The taxi arrived, and with the waitress's help, we got in. Emily, teary-eyed, asked to come along, so the three of us headed to the hospital. On the way there, Emily quietly began to speak.
My father has always been like that. He constantly says, "We are a noble family."
It seemed that growing up in a privileged environment had turned Charles into such an arrogant person. Too much wealth can drive people mad. Despite being his daughter, Emily is a kind-hearted woman. She is genuinely worried about Michael even now. How happy they would be if they could be together. But standing in their way is the huge obstacle that is Charles. Wanting to support them, I said to Emily, "I might have to fight your father. This could affect you, your mother, and your home." She looked at me, wide-eyed. After a moment of contemplation, she responded with determination.
No matter what happens, I want to marry Michael. I will talk to my mother.
Knowing her resolve, I took out my phone and made a call. "Hello, it's me. Sorry for the sudden request, but it's urgent. Gather everyone." Shortly after, we arrived at the hospital. Fortunately, Michael didn't have any fractures and was given a topical medication. We also got a medical report from the doctor, ready to deal with Charles anytime. The next day, I arrived at a rented conference room in downtown New York. Michael was worried about me, but since he had to work, I brought an assistant with me today. When I entered the room, many people were already there. There were older gentlemen, a woman in her 40s wearing glasses, and among them, I saw Charles. He looked utterly shocked when he saw me.
Why are you here?
As soon as he shouted, the others glared at him in unison. Noticing the tense atmosphere, Charles began to sweat and looked around nervously.
What's wrong, everyone?
"Well, it's obviously because you shouted, Charles."
Huh? More importantly, why is a high school dropout in this sacred place?
Though initially surprised, Charles quickly turned to me with contempt. "I summoned this emergency meeting."
What? Aren't you an outsider?
Charles shouted in anger. Trying to provoke him, I smirked. "Is that any way to talk to the principal shareholder?"
Huh?
Seeing the dumbfounded look on Charles's face made me chuckle. Well, it seems you don't even know your own shareholders. So much for your so-called noble family."
What?
He still seemed unable to grasp the reality. "It's true, I own more than half of the company's shares. I attend the shareholders' meetings, but since I'm in a wheelchair, I go unnoticed. Yesterday, I contacted the shareholders to convene an emergency shareholders meeting. Thank you all for attending on such short notice." I smiled to the shareholders, and they responded with smiles. Then I looked at Charles again. He was visibly shaken by my glare. "Thank you for yesterday. I wanted to show my gratitude, so I called this emergency meeting."
Gratitude.
Charles trembled with fear. As the principal shareholder, I had worked as an investor. Even now, from my wheelchair, I analyze market trends and advise younger investors. The money I've earned through investments exceeds several $1 million, allowing me to fund various companies. In return, I have a say in the management policies and can influence the appointment or dismissal of executives. I'd like to discuss the proposal to dismiss President Charles Parker.
Fire me? That's absurd.
Charles tried to storm out of the room. However, the other shareholders blocked the door, preventing his escape. When I explained the reason for this emergency meeting to the shareholders last night, they all agreed with me and supported the motion to pass a vote of no confidence against Charles. Since you hit the principal shareholder's son, an appropriate punishment is necessary. I glared at Charles. Understanding the gravity of the situation, he began to sweat profusely and panic. But then, he chuckled softly and burst into laughter.
You think you can threaten me? No way. Our family has been distinguished since my great-grandfather's time. I won't let it fall apart now.
Charles looked around at the shareholders.
If you fire me, this company will be finished. Our brand's 100-year history is what sets us apart.
I intend to merge your company with another I support.
What?
Being a major shareholder in another company, I plan to merge it with Charles's company. I was determined to use any means necessary to bring this despicable man down from his position as president. It will be an acquisition. Your company will be absorbed by another.
What? I won't allow such a thing.
Charles adamantly refused. If it became an acquisition, he would no longer be president. Realizing his position was threatened, he turned his hostility towards me.
I won't let some stranger take over the company my ancestors have run for generations.
My son was mistreated. I can't just let that go. We stared each other down, tension filling the air. Then Charles smirked and pointed at me.
You say he was mistreated, but do you have any proof that I did it?
Proof?
It's rude to accuse someone without proof. Even if you deeply apologize, I won't forgive you easily.
Then he raised his voice to the other shareholders.
You may have heard something from Mr. Anderson, but did he show you any proof?
They looked at each other and shook their heads. I had only explained the situation verbally to them.
So, no one has seen any proof. Then Mr. Anderson must be lying.
The room began to buzz, and suspicious glances were directed at me. Confident that he had turned the tables, Charles smirked triumphantly.
Your lies almost fooled everyone here. I'll have to sue you for defamation and demand compensation.
Charles approached me as I remained silent.
Why don't you say something, or do you have proof?
Yes.
Huh?
I asked my assistant to set up the equipment. A projector was placed in front of the screen, connected to my phone. I received special cooperation from someone for this presentation. I'll now show the video. I played the video stored on my phone. The screen showed footage of the Parker family and my family having dinner together. It was taken from an overhead angle, clearly from a security camera. Charles's face paled as he realized he was on the screen.
What is this footage? When did you get this?
He tried to approach me, but the shareholders restrained him. Anticipating this reaction, I had made sure to secure the evidence in advance. After taking Michael to the hospital yesterday, I went back to the restaurant. I explained the situation to the owner and the waitress and bought the security camera footage.
You bribed the restaurant. How underhanded.
I'm not so naive as to stay silent after my son was assaulted. Meanwhile, the footage continued to play, showing Michael answering Charles's questions. Then, as Michael was speaking, Charles punched him. The shareholders gasped in shock. The video showed Charles yelling at us.
A single-parent family and a high school dropout. No way I'm giving my daughter to you. Get out of here.
Then it showed us leaving for the hospital in a taxi. But the footage wasn't over yet. While Michael, Emily, and I headed to the hospital, Charles and his wife remained in the restaurant. Charles's expression hardened as he watched the screen.
Stop it. Turn off the video.
He shouted at me, but I had no intention of complying. Ignoring him, I turned up the volume. In the video, Charles's wife reprimanded him, and he slapped her.
Shut up. If you're the wife of the head of the family, you should obey quietly. I won't tolerate any backtalk. You, the company's people, and those arrogant shareholders are all just my pawns.
The video ended with his wife sobbing, and the screen went blank. Even after the video ended, everyone remained silent. Charles stood frozen in front of the screen, his face pale. The footage clearly shows Mr. Parker assaulting my son. Oh, and the last part was just a bonus. I smirked at him. You can't deny what you've done now. Charles, trembling, turned to the shareholders.
Huh.
He let out a pathetic yelp and backed away. The shareholders glared at him with furious expressions, ready to pounce. Now that the proof was out, and it was clear he had been looking down on the shareholders, Charles found himself cornered by everyone in the room. You should know what happens when you insult those who fund you.
Well,
Charles's face contorted, and he became increasingly frantic. You can't imagine what happens to a company abandoned by its shareholders. Even a family as wealthy as the Parkers would suffer greatly if all the shareholders turned their backs on them. If news of the incident with Michael spread and Charles's violent behavior was exposed, the company's image would be severely damaged. Clients would likely withdraw their business.
all right, I understand. I'll increase the dividends for everyone, so please forgive me.
Charles pleaded with the shareholders, hands clasped together. But they were furious and voiced their anger. How dare you insult us behind our backs?
I am terribly sorry. Please forgive me.
He repeatedly apologized, shouted at by the enraged shareholders. Surrounded by the majority of people, Charles became humble. Seeing him, who usually acts so high and mighty, become meek when his position is threatened, I realized this is the real Charles. Raised in a privileged environment and pampered by those around him, he lost his sense of gratitude and looked down on others using his ancestors' prestige. Living a luxurious life, Charles had no idea I was the principal shareholder and dared to hit Michael. This is the result. Unable to gain the shareholders' forgiveness, Charles, almost in tears, turned to me.
Mr. Anderson, I am deeply sorry. Please forgive me.
Do you regret hitting my son? He nodded vigorously and knelt before me.
Of course. I will also pay compensation to your son, so please continue to support us financially.
No, my goal is to remove you from the president's position. Then I continued. We met before the marriage meeting. Don't you remember? At the store, you were quite true.
What? Oh,
He finally recalled meeting me at the store, his face turning pale as he trembled. A company that can't even train its employees properly isn't worth supporting. I gave him a cold look. In a desperate move, Charles said something outrageous.
then I will give my daughter Emily to Michael. She has been raised strictly and is a fine woman. Please do as you wish with her.
Treating his precious daughter as a mere object made me furious. Don't be ridiculous. Children are not commodities. In my anger, I almost fell out of my wheelchair trying to leap at him.
I'm so sorry, but Emily wants to marry Michael. Her wish is my wish as well.
Oh, so you won't oppose Emily's wishes?
Of course not.
I smiled warmly, and he smiled back. Mistaking my smile for forgiveness, Charles collapsed to the floor in relief. Then, let's hear from her directly.
What?
I shouted toward the door. Come in. The door opened, and in came Michael, Emily, and Charles's wife. Seeing the three of them, Charles's jaw dropped in shock.
Why are you here?
We came together. I asked them to wait outside until I gave the signal. Why did I call these three here? It was to let them express their intentions directly to Charles.
Mr. Parker.
Michael, with gauze on his nose, glared at him. Charles looked at us, then quickly apologized to Michael.
Mr. Michael, I deeply apologize for hitting you. I am truly sorry.
Michael said nothing, turning his face to Emily.
I still want to marry Emily. But first, listen to what she has to say.
Emily looked straight at her father and spoke.
I have lived following your orders. I'm grateful for how you've raised me, but from now on, I will be with Michael.
Emily.
Then she stood beside her mother and glared at Charles.
My mother and I are leaving, and we are cutting all ties with you.
What?
In the taxi, I learned that she intended to separate from Charles. So, I brought her here to let her tell him directly.
Why? How can you do this? You're my wife.
He grabbed her shoulders and shook her, but she thrust the signed divorce paper at him and declared, I won't let my daughter be controlled by a cruel husband. Standing side by side, Michael and Emily made their declaration to Charles.
We will get married after we cut ties with you, Charles.
And my mother and I are leaving the house. Thank you for everything until now.
She said calmly, signifying the end of their relationship. Abandoned by his family, Charles cried and tried to cling to them.
No, don't leave me. I'm sorry for the harsh words and hitting you. I'll change, so please don't go.
But they looked down at him with blank expressions. Seeing that he was now isolated, I addressed the shareholders. Let's get back to the main issue. Those in favor of dismissing President Charles Parker, please clap. A few claps began, gradually growing louder. When everyone except Charles clapped, his fate was sealed. Your glorious life is now over. Curse your own foolishness.
No, please.
Charles collapsed to the floor, sobbing loudly. With that, the emergency shareholders meeting was adjourned. Afterward, the company was absorbed in a merger with another, and Charles was ousted from his position as CEO. Seeking help from former business partners, he was shunned when they learned of his violent behavior, leaving him isolated. Moreover, thanks to the skilled lawyer hired by his wife, his history of domestic abuse was brought to light, and he was ordered to pay millions in damages. The Parker family's distinguished name, one of the few in the country, ended with him. Charles attempted to start a new business with his remaining assets, but having never built a company from scratch, he quickly fell into financial trouble and declared bankruptcy. Desperately trying to regain his former glory, he repeatedly started and failed businesses, accumulating debt and exhausting his assets. When he couldn't repay his debts, his mansion was seized, and all his historical furniture and luxury items were confiscated. With no job, family, or home, Charles wandered the streets and eventually became homeless. One can only wonder what his ancestors, who worked so hard to build their wealth, would think of him now. They would likely stand by his bedside, whispering curses in his ear each night in anger. After the company was merged, Emily and her mother lived modestly together. Freed from Charles's abusive grip, they appeared much happier. Michael, relieved, happily married Emily. They invited me to live with them in their new home. At first, I refused, not wanting to intrude on the newlyweds, but their insistence spared me from loneliness. There was one thing I almost forgot. I finally gave Michael the wedding gift I had carefully saved for him.